let's go all around the country here. Week 6 predictions. These are a lot of games that we haven't hit on yet. Starting with Texas OU, which, if you were to ask me in the early portion of the schedule release season, I would have said would be our spotlight game on this upcoming Saturday. It's not. Oklahoma is favored by 2. This is a noon Eastern Time kickoff on Big Fox, Texas. As I tweeted out last night, I fully believe this. They need a win so much more than Oklahoma does. You're not going to tell kids in the locker room that. You're not going to tell coaches that. But when you zoom it out, if we just bring the late kick blimp over the game, and we're just asking, it's Tom Herman over there, there's Lincoln Riley over here. Who needs this more? Oklahoma doesn't need this game. I don't care if it would mean them losing 3 straight for the first time since the World War II era, whatever it would be. I don't care. Texas needs this. Oklahoma wants it. Texas and Tom Herman need it. What are we doing at Texas? If they lose this game with the roster advantage and you got the quarterback advantage, what are they doing? What are we doing? What are we doing with Tom Herman? I remember Chris Del Conte in the offseason was doing an interview with Chip over at Horns 24/7, and he kind of said what he needed to say, which is everything's in place here. We got the new construction going on. We got this and that taken care of. So basically what he was saying was we have built the airplane. If Tom Herman's the right pilot, then he's going to be able to fly this thing at a high level. But if he's not the right pilot, then we just need to find the right pilot. He didn't say that in so many words, but that's how I interpreted it. We're finding out. These are the kind of weeks where you find it out because their back's up against the wall. They've had back-to-back weeks of horrible miscues, looking very ill-prepared to play high-level football. And again, this isn't a roster where you're just starting freshmen all over the place. This is the number 5 roster per the 24/7 Sports Team Talent Composite. They have no business having to scratch and claw their way to a 58-58 tie, I think it was, to force overtime in Lubbock, and then a week later have the exact same mess, again, with penalties all over the place and bad situational awareness. So, point being, if Oklahoma loses Saturday, they've still been to the playoffs every year to this point. Lincoln Riley's been there. If Texas loses Saturday, they're already out of the playoff picture at that point. They may very well be out of the Big 12 title picture at that point. What are we even doing there? But I will say this. I really think that, at least reading the tea leaves out of Austin, had a pretty good week out there. I think their locker rooms responded well, in other words. What does that mean on Saturday? I don't know, because you can be as fired up as you want to, and you can have all the right messages written on your eye black. You put the ball on the ground, and you flinch early, and you got 110 yards worth of penalties again. Doesn't really matter. I will lean ever so slightly. Told you I don't think there's a lot of skill in picking this game. I will lean ever so slightly to the more experienced quarterback here, who has run his mouth after that game last week in what you would hope is a leadership style. You got to make it happen on the field, or else the words are meaningless. So let's see Sam Ehlinger make it happen on the field. I am halfway excited about them getting Whittington back this week at wide receiver. So my ever so slight lean is Texas to win outright, and I will take Texas plus the 2. These certainly are not any of our official predictions or official plays. Let's say that. We'll make a prediction. You're not going to hold us to any of these. Let me say that. Alabama is favored by 23 at Ole Miss. This game's been moved. All right, so let's try and understand the reasoning here. This game was originally slated for a 6 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff. But apparently, someone who knows weather far more than I was able to ascertain information that said the weather's going to be too bad to kick off at 6 p.m. However, 90 minutes later at 7:30, everything's cool. Everything's clear. It's like a pop-up thunderstorm. But in this case, we have a tropical depression coming through at that point. So one of those pop-up tropical depressions, you hate to see it this time of year, one of those old pop-up tropical depressions, it's in and out, 90 minutes, it's gone, and hey, I guess blue clear skies by the time that the Tide and Rebels kick off here. So that made no sense to me, but at least we have football, like I said. So I'm not in a position to make fun of anyone because we didn't think we would have the games a few months ago. Alabama's got to dictate terms here. Now, they can play this game any which way they want to. They can run the ball if they want to. They can throw the ball if they want to. Ole Miss's defense is grade A atrocious at stopping either. Alabama has not been able to run the ball this year. Did you notice what Nick Saban said earlier this week, by the way? He was asked about that by the media there at Alabama. And he said, well, I'll tell you what he didn't say. What he didn't say is our offensive line just hasn't played up to standard. What he said was, we got to do a better job as a staff of getting our guys prepared to play the right way. Now, I don't know how you interpreted that, But I interpreted it to mean he's not necessarily watching that film and saying, oh man, these guys aren't good enough. These guys aren't doing the job. What he's looking at and saying, they're ill-prepared to do the job. So that's on us. Because that's not one of the things he always says. When he says that, it's very rare, and there's normally a meaning behind it. So I expect them to heavily focus on the run game this week. And that's been the question. Where is the run game? So you know they have Georgia on deck. The last thing in the world Nick Saban's interested in doing is getting into a back-and-forth shootout here, where his defense has got to be on the field all afternoon. They play, instead of playing 64 plays, they play 91. Even in a win, they're on the field 91 snaps. No one wants that. So I will say this, and as much as rain may or may not be a factor here, pretty sure wind will be a factor. If wind is a factor in this game, 23 is way too low. Because Ole Miss can't do anything else. So 23 is going to be way too low. If you got more than like 15, 20 mile an hour sustained, which you figure to have, Alabama will beat them to death. And it'll be a far wider margin to victory than 23. We're going to take Bama minus 23. And we're going to obviously take them to win as well. Let me get to one of the most interesting off-the-radar games in all of the SEC, and I would argue in the nation this Saturday. Arkansas, fresh off their upset win against Mississippi State, they're playing Auburn Saturday. Auburn is a 13.5-point favorite. We're going to have more on this game in a little while. There's a lot going on at Auburn. Some of you Auburn fans understand where I'm coming from with this, but this is not a big national radar game. The last time you guys thought about Auburn was when you probably turned the game off at halftime when they were getting smoked by Georgia. There's a lot going on over there. A lot of injury, a lot of internal dynamics. There's a lot going on. They do not have their stuff together right now. Arkansas is coming in there fully planning on winning this game. I don't view this, in other words, as two respective sides having the typical mentality that a near two-touchdown favorite would have and a near two-touchdown underdog would have. Don't feel those typical dynamics here at all. I'd be happy, if I were Gus Malzahn, I'd be happy with a field goal win Saturday. I'd be happy with a win of any kind. Run defense was very shaky last week. Now, Georgia will do that to you. Kentucky did it too. And who's to say Arkansas can't do it? Arkansas didn't light the world on fire offensively against Mississippi State, but they didn't have to because they shut their offense down. Now we ask about Auburn's offense. And I ask you, what is Auburn's offense? Because that's another thing that I think internally is an issue over there. I don't really think they know who they are. By the way, has anyone noticed this week, I was listening to some Auburn players interviewed about the upcoming game, and they talked about Arkansas. They were asked about Arkansas, and they talked about, in fact, they went out of their way to talk about how improved that team looks. I don't know if everyone over there realized it, but what you were doing was you were talking about how improved this team is, which only can imply they're much better than they were with that coach they had last year. Problem is, the coach they had last year is right here in your locker room. It's Chad Morris. So I hope Chad had earplugs in early this week because his players were steadily and subtly tossing his performance in Fayetteville under the bus. Hey, his performance at Auburn so far has been nothing to write home about. I don't know what they are offensively is what I'm telling you. So, listen, they may win. I'm going to pick them to win the game. I don't know if they have pull-away ability at all. Pull-away meaning stretch the lead late. So I'm going to come back to this game. But, you know, it could be a couple of ways. It could be that Auburn just has no business being favored by nearly 2 touchdowns over anyone, or could be the other way. But I'll tell you the danger in rushing in to just take the points here. We did it last week with Missouri. Remember, we took Missouri plus the points against Tennessee, and we had all these things in our mind that Tennessee wasn't going to be able to do. We didn't think Tennessee was going to be able to bomb away on them. We didn't think anything like that, and it was going to be a slower, methodical game. Well, we were right about all those things, but it didn't matter because the roster advantage was such that Tennessee was just able to lean on Missouri. Well, that's something I don't think Auburn can do. They don't have the offensive line to do it. And I haven't seen any semblance of identity offensively from them so far to think that, well, all of a sudden it'll just click this week. Maybe it will. We'll see. We're going to come back to that game later, though. Virginia Tech is playing North Carolina. This is a top 20 matchup that regardless of what someone tells you in the grocery store, this is a top 20 matchup. It's a noon kickoff Eastern time on ABC. Beware those preseason magazines and the marriage that some of us tend to have between us and those preview magazines. It may be conscious, it may be subconscious, but you know what I'm talking about. You go to the beach, you go out on the lake, and you just absorb everything over the course of a weekend over the summer. You absorb everything that's in that preview magazine, and whether you mean to or not, you let what that magazine says about a team become your default setting. And it's not that you can't change your mind, but it's going to take something other than what's already in your mind to have it change. So what did the preview magazine culture probably tell you? It probably told you that North Carolina is a bona fide contender this year. Maybe not for Clemson, maybe not going to overtake Clemson, but they're a surefire contender for number 2 in the ACC. Meanwhile, no one knows what Virginia Tech is, and then you read about all the COVID mess they've had up there, but you had never seen either team play a football game this year. So now we've seen them play some games. And I know what a lot of your minds have been doing, because mine's been doing the same thing. You've been watching North Carolina, and it was a slop fest, not literally because they played indoors in week 1 against Syracuse, but they never pulled away from Syracuse until the very end, and it was kind of a misleading final score, and then they had a bunch of time off for cancellations, and then last week they played Boston College, couldn't hit deep plays to save their life against Boston College, and they won, but they failed relative to expectation being a point spread. Meanwhile, Virginia Tech's had like half their roster out and half their coaching staff out, and they've just found ways to win. So you keep waiting for North Carolina to do what you think they're capable of, and you keep waiting for Virginia Tech to fall because they're doing a lot more than you thought they were capable of. But what we don't factor into that equation is, could we just been wrong about either team? That's always a concern. So in this one, run defense is all it's about. Make no mistake. North Carolina's been pretty good at stopping the run, hadn't faced a lot of great rushing attacks. Virginia Tech, I think, ran for over 300 last week, haven't faced the best run Ds in the world. It's still early in the year, so we don't know if they look poor because you made them look poor. It's that whole deal. So we'll see. But I'll tell you, as much as I'm watching that, the one thing I need to see, man, there's talent at receiver, there's talent at quarterback for Carolina. They need to be able to stretch the field more because they've done a poor job of it so far. Having said that, I got to trust our numbers. I'm going to take North Carolina to win. I'm going to take North Carolina to cover.